Wanna play games? Okay. I'll play with you. Come on. Okay. You wanna play rough? Okay. No. Say hello to my little friend! You wanna play rough? Okay.
Buongiorno, space mobsters. I'm back again to bring you another video exploring psychological concepts and grounded everyday examples. This episode, we will be covering the classic 2002 game Mafia in relation to a topic in social psychology known as group or crowd psychology. For anyone unfamiliar, Mafia is a game about, you guessed it, a mafia. But more specifically, it is about Tommy Angelo, an Italian-American taxi driver in Lost Heaven, Illinois, and his journey to achieve the American dream. As this was the height of both Prohibition and the Great Depression, Tommy, along with many other Americans, had to stoop to less than desirable actions to achieve what they felt they were owed. After being caught in the crossfire of two rivaling gangs, Tommy found himself in a city where mob rule outweighs the rule of law, and he decides that if his neighborhood was going to be run by organized crime, that he was going to get a piece of the action by joining the local Salieri Mafia family. To him, smuggling moonshine and protecting the neighborhood far outweighed getting paid 30 cents for a taxi ride. My goal is to discover how an individual may go from a law-abiding, hard-working taxi driver to a member of an organized crime family, and how these socio-psychological explanations have evolved over time.
Let me introduce you to the other Dons. Don Duck, Don Kong, Don Amnesia, forget about it. Don Onomatopoeia, bang.
Don Salieri.
Every decision I make, it's what's good for the business and my boys.
Don Morello.
I told you to shut the fuck up!
That's a wrap for
Don Morello.
Finally, the scariest Don of them all. Don de Don Don.
Thank you. I'd like to introduce you all to my suspenseful son, Don Don Don.
Our story begins not in 1930s Illinois, but in 1895 France. An intellectual named Gustave Le Bon published his book, The Crowd, in which he was one of the first people to look at crowds as a social phenomenon worth studying. In what I'm referring to as classical social theory, he gave us many popular terms and concepts, such as probably the most famous, mob mentality. Le Bon laid the groundwork for much of what is known as social psychology today. His work was expanded upon in the 1950s by Leon Festinger, who crafted the idea of de-individuation. According to the APA, de-individuation can be defined as an experiential state categorized by a loss of self-awareness, altered perceptions, and a reduction of inner restraints that results in the performance of unusual, sometimes antisocial behavior. It can be caused by a number of factors, such as a sense of anonymity or submersion in a group. So basically, what they're saying is, being a part of a large crowd is a lot like being on drugs. Isn't that neat? Festinger created this word to describe the mental process that results in a mob mentality. Remember, de-individuation is a process, while mob mentality is the product of that process. Right about now, you're probably asking, hey, what the hell does this have to do with Mafia? And I would answer with, can you wait a moment, please? So, if we are to interpret Mafia using our now established classical theory, we may conclude that Tommy Angelo was swept up in the moment. He felt as though no one would be able to identify him, or that he was trying to fit in with the gang. That he temporarily lost his moral compass and proceeded to, well, act out.
You even touched me and you're dead. You're Hey! Beat like that. You
When discussing the idea of crowd or group theory, most people discuss the idea of anonymity. Research has shown us that when anonymous, individuals are more likely to engage in these unusual, sometimes antisocial behaviors. A child wearing a mask on Halloween is going to be much more likely to steal candy out of a bowl than a student stealing candy off of their teacher's desk because they fear being caught. However, a shortcoming of Le Bon and Festinger's theories is that it is an assumption that these people are anonymous when part of a crowd. If you have ever attended a protest or a sports event or a marathon or any other kind of large crowd, it is very unlikely that you are thinking, I can do whatever I want because I won't get caught. Research has shown that when we participate in these crowds, more often than not, we are attending with people we know. These are people protesting or showing support in their neighborhoods with their friends and family over issues that affect them. And when you phrase it that way, it seems a bit odd to assume that most of these people would be under the impression that they're anonymous. And while we can acknowledge that anonymity is an aspect of crowd science, it is often highly overemphasized. It is reasonable for Le Bon to make this assumption from outside the crowd, but research has shown us that this is not usually the case. The flaws in this classical interpretation can be seen in Mafia. The Morello and Salieri families are some of the most well-known people in the entire city, and there are multiple instances of people purposely antagonizing or steering clear of these families. They fear them not because they're unknown, but because people know exactly who they are.
Tom Morello, I didn't know it was you.
You know anybody else driving a rare import in this part of town, Joey?
No. Well, then, I'm sorry, I was driving real slow.
You're saying this is my fault?
No, no, sir. I ain't never been in no accident.
Well, repairs are gonna be expensive.
Oh, you're not gonna need that, sir. The tires are just fine. The grill's a little bent up is all. I mean, I got a cousin I can...
Another topic that is consistently discussed in group psychology is conforming to authority figures. Leaders are often so influential because they have authority over our identities. You may find yourself obeying your football coach not because you like him or trust his abilities, but because he has the power to kick you off the team if you disobey. I'm sure that most of us has had a manager that expected us to do a task how they want, even if we know it is less efficient. In your manager's mind, you being obedient is far more valuable than you finding the best way to complete a task. Tom may disagree with the Don's judgments privately, but if he made his opinions public, let's just say...
What the hell is this? That's a Sicilian message. It means
Tommy Angelo.
he sleeps with the fishes.
I'm sure that while most of us do what the manager asks because we don't want our employment threatened, I'm sure that we also go back to our own method when the manager turns their back because we know what works best for us. These ideas extend far beyond the football team or petty squabbles with your manager. Some of the most well-known psychological studies on the matter are the Stanford Prison Experiment and the Milgram Shock Experiment.
Psst. You should know what I'm talking about. This was part of your homework.
These studies do an excellent job of exploring how individuals can be swayed by authority figures. But when we apply these beliefs to mafia, we begin to see the cracks in the foundation. An issue with classical theory is the perception that crowds are abnormal, a force beyond our understanding. We view these crowds as if they are a disease in need of being cured. But the Salieri family did not materialize from nowhere. These gangs are a symptom of the many ailments that plague society at the time. Therefore, we can understand that Tom, Sam, and Polly are not gullible individuals blind to the fact that they are ordered to hurt people. It is that they are painfully aware that the police are corrupt. In their minds, they are choosing the lesser of two evils. And from that perspective, a lot of their decisions begin to make sense. We now know that individuals tend to conform when they feel as though they are contributing to a larger, more important cause. Don Salieri is the ultimate authority in Little Italy, but we see time and time again that the Don does not receive blind faith from those closest to him. We see it when Polly pursues side hustles without informing him. We see it when Frank and Tom become police informants to protect their families. And we even see it with Sam, the way he protects a witness for his own emotions and then lies to the boss about it. With these examples, we can see both the extent as well as the limitations of groupthink. Groupthink can be defined as a mode of thinking in which members of a group tend to accept a viewpoint or conclusion that represents a perceived group consensus, whether or not the group members believe it to be valid, correct, or optimal. This is all just a fancy way of saying when your friend's telling you a story about their ex or someone who tried them at the store, and you trying to hype them up, but deep down you kind of know that they're wrong. So with this definition, we can determine that for a majority of the plot, our main cast is operating under groupthink. They collectively believe that smuggling alcohol and protecting the neighborhood with their insurance is positively affecting their community. They are providing goods and services they feel as though the community needs. But when they are asked to silence one of their own, then group dynamics begin to fall apart, and our gang members begin asking themselves if their actions are justifiable. It's not that these people were willingly participating in senseless violence, but that they were asked to make tough decisions for a cause that they genuinely support. Asking them to go against their morals was the Don's downfall. While these people are often misguided, it does us no good to shift the blame further up the ladder. We like to believe that history has a few monsters, people who were so vile and evil that we remember their names for generations. Hitler, Saddam Hussein, Jim Jones. But the reality is that these people only got as far as they did because they had thousands and millions of people supporting them. We have to acknowledge that given the right circumstances, we are all capable of evil. That is the only way to overcome our shortcomings. By acknowledging that we are susceptible to this level of groupthink and conformity, are we able to see our surroundings for what they really are and determine if a group is acting in our best interest. That is the only way to overcome our shortcomings. Only by acknowledging that we are susceptible to this level of groupthink and conformity are we able to see our surroundings for what they really are and determine if a group is acting in our best interest.
This is a simple misunderstanding.
You come here unannounced on the day my daughter is to be married.
Well, actually, we were brought here against our will, so...
Now that we have a clear understanding of the foundations of social psychology, let us ask How has the field evolved? Instead of jumping to conclusions, such as all crowds are violent, chaotic, and random, we must take each instance of crowds and put them into perspective. What modern psychologists have discovered is that these crowds are often self-fulfilling prophecies. Free speech and the right to protest are fundamental human rights that should exist everywhere. When law-abiding citizens are ignored or even verbally and physically harassed by the police, they begin to see the police as enemies. No longer are we all a part of one group that is seeking the improvement of society, but people who want to change the status quo and those who wish to defend the status quo. But when that status quo is poverty, crime, and apathy from those in charge, then violence to change the status quo suddenly becomes a bit more justified. With this perspective, we can see that crowds are less like a wildfire and more like a pot of water boiling over. The outcome is predictable and preventable if you know what to look for. We try to fit all crowds into these small, easy to understand boxes, but obviously reality is a bit more complicated than that. By taking a more contemporary approach, our first question now becomes, who makes up these crowds? What common goals are they trying to achieve by organizing into crowds? As stated earlier, we know that during this time alcohol was illegal, a policy that was highly unpopular. This law turned many once legitimate businessmen into instant criminals. Unless they continued to sell their alcohol illegally, then they became unemployed and homeless. World War I ended in 1918. Prohibition began in 1920, and the Great Depression began in 1929. We can see a clear timeline of a vast majority of Americans becoming unemployed and financially destitute over and over for a decade. The government, and by extension the police, often sided with large corporations, including organized crime, over destitute civilians. It wasn't until a decade later, after Prohibition and the Great Depression ended, that the mafia moved away from these actions that, while criminal, were still mostly socially acceptable, to the general consensus of only being seen as thugs, murderers, and nuisances. As trust in the government and police went up, trust in the mafia went down. If I knew absolutely nothing about you and I were to ask you to describe yourself, what would you say? You may talk about your height, or your favorite color, or about your pet named Dr. Cookie Cat. These are what are known as your personal identity. But you are likely to describe yourself with more than that. You may tell me who your family is, what company you work for, or what sports team you play on. Even your ethnicity and nationality. These are known as your social identity. We often have this belief in America that individuality is what makes us unique. And while of course that's partially true, it's only a piece of the puzzle. Both our individuality and our group affiliations are what create our identity. Contemporary theory tells us that people do not become de-individualized in the sense that they lose their identity. It is that their identity shifts from a perspective of me to a perspective of we. Using contemporary theory, we may find that Tommy did not lose his identity as a hard-working cab driver struggling to pay his bills. He just shifted his thinking to stop viewing himself as one person against the world, but as the working class, as an Italian, and as an American. And when he started thinking about his entire neighborhood, he stopped letting things happen to him and started taking matters into his own hands. With this contemporary approach, we may ask why the violence in these groups continue to escalate to the point of instability, to which I introduce you to the topic of group polarization. The tendency for members of a group to move towards a more extreme version of the positions they held prior to joining said group. As a result, the group as a whole tends to respond in more extreme ways than one would expect when looking at its members individually. This takes the underlying concept of groupthink and takes it a step further. Perhaps you know someone who's joined a sports team or frat or a sorority or any other kind of exclusive, tight-knit group and seen how it's taken over their entire life, become their entire identity. Perhaps you are that person. Well, this is group polarization in action. From the outside looking in, you may think that Tommy is too violent and unempathetic to be looking out for anyone but himself. But ask yourself, is violence really against societal norms? As Americans, we constantly tolerate violence. From soldiers in war, police officers shooting bank robbers, and prisons executing serial killers. If we're going to get down to the truth, we must accept that we do in fact condone violence as a society. It is merely a matter of who wields it. Therefore, in Tommy's mind, once the police have failed him in his neighborhood, it is now up to him to bring order to the streets by whatever means necessary. Lack of trust in the police and the system as a whole is what leads to groups that go against social norms. If you want alcohol use to slow, then we have to discover and fix why people drink in the first place. Punishing a majority of the population for such a minor offense only leads to higher levels of crime and eventually violence. The Black Panthers would have never formed unless black men felt threatened by the system. The Stonewall riots would have never happened unless queer individuals felt threatened by the police. Even the Continental Army and the entire American Revolutionary War would not have occurred unless the colonists felt as if British royals in redcoats were not looking out for the colony's best interests. If we want to avoid these kinds of violent interactions, then the only way we can do that is by building trust in our communities, in our police, and in our government. And it is not the responsibility of citizens, but the responsibility of the government to maintain order and, by extension, the trust of its citizens.
In that first sit-down, it was Big Fat Rick, Ricardo Montoya, Hothead Rick, he got that name because he was prone to dramatic outbursts, and Lil Ricky Wrap-It-Up, who was always great at the end of a meeting.
Well, that'll be about it for today. Sorry, I know this video was a bit longer and denser than my last one, but the further I looked into the topic, the deeper I got, and I realized I was only scratching the surface and I couldn't just omit anything. So if you guys want, if you want more about this topic, I could probably go for another 30 minutes. But in general, I will try to keep most of my videos a little bit simpler and easier to wrap your head around. But the majority of my information came from renowned psychologists Clifford, Stott, and Steven Reicher. I hope I'm saying those names right. So if you're very interested in this topic and want to watch another 2 hours of boring lectures on the topic, I would highly recommend them, and it'll be down below. But I hope that I have taught you, or at least refreshed your memory on many vocabulary terms, from mob mentality to conformity to group polarization. If you have any questions about specific terms, or would like a better exploration of how these terms fit to this or another game, just let me know and maybe we can work through them together. And as a final question for anyone who's made it this far, if you were part of a large crowd and were capable of doing whatever you wanted to do with zero chance of being identified or held accountable, what would you do? And don't worry, your comments are anonymous. I hope you all like, comment, and subscribe. If you enjoyed this video, please share with any psychology or video game nerds you know. See ya.
This program was made possible by viewers like you. Thank you.